move on. My old friend from the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO, program manager there, Mr. Fernando Burgés, who has always been a great friend of the people of Gilgit Baltistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Qureshi. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here. I've been given this very difficult task to be the last speaker in such a high-level panel, and I believe I'm the only non-academic in this panel, so I think I will give a very brief explanation why I'm here, what is my organization, and I will talk very briefly, because I know we're running out of time, about Gilgit Baltistan and why we have to talk about Gilgit Baltistan. So very briefly, my organization, the name says it all. We are the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. We work with nations and peoples that don't feel well represented or are not represented at all in the international arena. As you know, the UN is, I see it working for this organization as a club of states in which they decide if you are allowed to speak or not on certain topics. And the nations and peoples that we work with are the ones who often see challenges to voice their concerns. They are mostly ethnic and religious minorities, occupied territories, or de facto states. We work a lot on Gilgit Baltistan because it's an emblematic case. Sometimes the issue of self-determination can be, sometimes it's not objective, sometimes it's a bit blurred, sometimes it's very difficult to identify if a case is easy or difficult to work with. Gilgit Baltistan, on the other, however, is a clear-cut case. And it's one of the most symbolic issues we work with. So I feel that Gilgit Baltistan was relatively unknown to the West until recently. If you Google, so I'm talking about, of course, in English language, if you Google, you will see that nobody, or at least it's very hard to find articles in English about Gilgit Baltistan until a few years ago. And the turning point was CPEC. Of course, academics who work on South Asia knew about Gilgit Baltistan and are involved in research with Gilgit Baltistan, and of course in the local language it has always been an issue, but no, not in the West. So in the European Parliament I've been working with this issue for a few years, and until recently every meeting with MEPs about Gilgit Baltistan started by explaining what is and where is Gilgit Baltistan. And luckily this is changing. So yeah, CPEC has put Gilgit Baltistan on the West radar. Basically due to its key geographical location between China and Pakistan. So it has been said here, I believe now it's very clear, but without Gilgit Baltistan there is no CPEC. It's simple. It has to cut through, otherwise there is no connection between A and B. So being a UN declared disputed territory, it's a matter that we can't ignore, the international community cannot ignore. So Gilgit Baltistan, we have to talk about Gilgit Baltistan. Briefly, the focus of UNPO is always human rights, and especially the minorities. So we know what happens when usually big actors do big business, such as CPEC. Usually they talk about military dimension, economic, energy, and of course geopolitical. And minorities are usually the ones who pay the price, the ones who are left overlooked, and the ones who don't figure usually in political analysis. So that's what we try to do, to explain what is actually happening with the people on the ground. So one of the things I would like to briefly cover here, Mr. Wagmar has already spoken about it, but just about these religious conflicts in Gilgit Baltistan. In these mountain regions, the religious composition is very different from the rest of Pakistan, where about 4/5 of the population identifies itself as Sunni Muslims. In Gilgit Baltistan, ethnic and tribal identities and social ties developed over centuries were valued more than sectarial affiliations. Local rulers generally follow secular policies in dealing with their subject and built alliances with other royals and powerful families in the area through marriages, regardless of their religious affiliations. So the region has been historically rich in the demographic composition. and saw peaceful coexistence among these different ethnic groups until, as Mr. Qureshi has said, 1974, when Prime Minister Bhutto abrogated the state subject rule. This is the turning point in Gilgit Baltistan history, because from that moment onwards, a massive influx of external people, especially Sunnis coming from Pakistan, migrated and moved to Gilgit Baltistan. This, unfortunately, has made the region a fertile breeding ground for the rise of sectarian conflicts. One of the reasons is that the erosion of traditional culture, the growing social and economic disparities, and unemployment among the youth all built this scenario. As an academic has pointed out, at the core, religious tolerance was the characteristic of the people of Gilgit Baltistan. But this is unfortunately changing quickly because of what I just said, this massive influx. What is the point here is that the people of Gilgit Baltistan, they are particularly vulnerable to the judicial abuse of blasphemy laws, especially in light of the lack of adequate access to justice. Blasphemy complaints against neighbors, peers, or business associates continue on the rise, and they're usually pursued to settle personal grievances or to intimidate vulnerable people. The number of cases of blasphemy, unjust blasphemy cases against native people of Gilgit Baltistan is really scary. The UN Human Rights Committee once voiced its deep concern at the blasphemy law's vague language and disproportionate application on people belonging to minorities and the high number of false allegations. The European Parliament also in 2016 in a resolution pointed out the systematic and grave violations of religious freedom taking place in Pakistan, which are being exacerbated by widespread sectarian violence against religious and ethnic minorities. Going back to CPEC, the situation, when it comes to human rights, the situation has only worsened. The local population has been forced to accept the terms and conditions of the development project without consultation or adequate compensation. What is more concerning is the violent crackdown against those in Gilgit Baltistan who dare to speak out. It has been said here, the Anti-terrorism Act and military judiciary, the Gilgit Baltistan population is stripped of its communicative freedom as the Pakistani government has systematically silenced any attempt at media coverage of the human rights violations in the regions. Pakistani security forces in Gilgit and other towns through Gilgit Baltistan arrested over 500 youths protesting human rights abuses and demanding the Pakistani occupation forces to leave Gilgit Baltistan. More than 140 journalists and religious personalities have been placed under house arrest in Gilgit Baltistan under strict supervision of the police and of intelligence. The majority of the human rights activists charged with sedition or terrorism for participating in peaceful demonstrations are being tried in front of military anti-terrorism courts that are organized outside the scope of the Constitution, which is not applicable in the region because Gilgit Baltistan, after all, does not belong officially to the territory of Pakistan. I will fast track here my presentation. I'm sure you all want to ask questions to the panelists. Let me just say that the Pakistani government claims that the investment and project implemented in the area will bring 1.8 million jobs to the native people. This official narrative is highly contested in the area given the fact that China is bringing its own manpower to work on constructions. Dr. Stott spoke about Africa-Chinese influence and development projects in Africa, and it's happening the same there. They're bringing their own people to work under the excuses of bringing security and ensuring that their developments will be secure. So the same strategy is being applied in Gilgit Baltistan. Last but not least, it's been 6 decades now that Gilgit Baltistan has been under systematic human rights violations, and its people living in a constitutional limbo, where the Pakistani government does not include the region in its constitution, but also doesn't give the right to self-determination or political representation. So they have nothing. I would go on, but I think it's enough. I would just conclude by saying that from the UNPO perspective, CPEC is a problematic issue because it's the marriage of two states with very poor records in protecting and promoting human rights, on the contrary. So these two states have persecuted ethnic minorities, they are persecuting ethnic minorities, and with CPEC we have I believe we don't have reasons to be optimistic when we think about the future of these minorities. So the importance of including this discussion when we talk about the energy dimension, the environmental dimension, the transport, everything that has been discussed, we need to talk about the ethnic minorities being suffering the consequences of this problem.